We don't recognize so well how dependent the rest of the world is on the resources that we have in Canada. If we can be more responsible with them, it can be not just to our benefit, but it can be to everyone's benefit as well. We underestimate the future standing and position and benefit that will generate for the country. I think all countries underestimate that at the moment. Calvert Foundation is the epitome of an impact investing firm. So our business issues securities out to the world, particularly to retail investors. We allow people to invest in our business with as little as $20. And then we pool that money and we actively invest in businesses that provide both a financial return to us and a social return to society. So not one or the other, it's got to be both things. And those are the companies that we then invest in. And then with the financial return that we get, we provide that money back to our investors again. So these aren't donations or grants or anything they're giving us. They're actually making investments like they would in any other company.
Look at the way that investments have kind of evolved into, you know, some really serious mathematical equations and things like derivatives and all of these extra things that don't necessarily have that end product in mind. What's the value of investing on a more human to human level?
Yeah, that's a big question. But I think that really is the crux of what we're doing. That for a long time, I think before the socially responsible revolution came into investing in corporations and companies, the analysis was largely about that business and how that business can generate financial return for itself. And then people started to come across a way of thinking that said, actually, our business, by being in business, affects the environment around it. And that environment around it ends up affecting the business. It can be that those are our clients, it can be that those are our suppliers, it can be that is our reputation as well. And I think when that kind of thinking started to come into corporations, they started to get over this hump. And the hump was always, we must be here to generate money for our shareholders. And when they could start to see that actually, by the way we affect the environment around us, we will in turn affect our shareholders and the profits we can generate for our shareholders. The two things were no longer at odds with each other. And that's when I think you really start to see the social responsible revolution come in. And I think our business takes that kind of at its core, that we look at businesses and say, you know, if you're going to be a business that does good for your village, your town, your city, that will reverberate back to you as a business and make your business stronger as well. And that makes you a better investment.
How has the Calvert Foundation used its investments to impact the environment in sustainable ways, or in ways of allowing people to take themselves away from some of the fossil fuel infrastructure?
That's really an interesting area and concept. I think I've come across it a number of times in my career, how to move from the sort of fossil fuel way of our society operating to a cleaner way of operating. And I used to live in London, and I was an investment banker in London, and some of my big clients, I could think why they had such energy intensive operations. It was not just that it was bad for the environment, it was bad for them profitably as well, and I couldn't understand why they couldn't see this. And so I'd spent a lot of time with them, helping them understand how, through the power of finance, that we could help change that equation for them, that we could not only make them more profitable, but that we could make them cleaner as well. And I think that it's still difficult, because one of the greatest forces that we face in this movement is the force of inertia. It's very difficult for people to do something different than what they've always done. There needed to be, and there still needs to be, a lot of discussion around how it's a financially profitable thing to do to make this move as well. Of all the potential retrofit opportunities in the city of New York, it's been like 1% of them have been done. But they're all profitable opportunities. And so it's a question of someone helping people understand that investing a little bit today, even though it's an investment and has to be paid back, that over the long run, the savings that you can get by reducing your reliance on expensive energy generated from fossil fuels, is significantly profitable for you. So it's like a whole equation there that all kind of is coming together, and I think this is a really great time to see it come together. The financial equation for people historically was much simpler, and it's become much more complex, and in the complexity is where all the things like the environment matter. So we can say costs now are not just the costs you have to write out of your checkbook, but there are externality costs. And the more analysis and the more studies and the more data that comes out on that, it helps with that cost equation, and that helps with the financial equation, which then helps people get over that inertia hump. It's still a work in progress, and it still has to go around and around a lot more.
I really love your explanation, because it's not getting too far ahead of itself, but it's also recognizing the opportunities.
Yeah.
Just to kind of add a little bit of context to this conversation, could you tell us a little bit about where you came from,
Sure,
and some of the industries that you've been involved with that's kind of helped you come to this nuanced understanding that you have?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think my whole career has kind of helped me come to where I am. My career started in the oil industry, so I worked in Calgary for a big international oil company. I was directly involved in the field work and the things that were happening, the operations of the business. So I got to see a lot of what was going on and what was going right and wrong. And it was a great kind of learning environment. And then I moved to London. I went to business school in London, and then after that I worked for a big private equity company over there and worked in a distribution business that they had purchased. And so I went to work in this distribution business, a big trucking business. So again, it was like back to this idea of retrofitting. This was a business heavily reliant on fleets of trucks and big factories and things like that. So I got to see a lot of how we could improve the financial condition of the company by also improving the environmental condition of the company. And there, the great thing was that private equity is very interested in any way you can generate financial returns. So we got to do a lot of cool projects there too. And then I went to work as an investment banker in London, and I had clients like the Royal Mail, which is the mail business in the United Kingdom, which has an enormous number of sorting depots around the UK that are all very energy inefficient. And so we worked a lot with them on how to finance some of the retrofitting they wanted to do. And then I moved to the United States, and I went to work for the World Bank. And I led a little business there called Innovative Finance. And then after having done that for a few years, I had my opportunity to come to Calvert Foundation. And so that's how I got here. Now I'm the Chief Financial Officer here.
Yes, so it really sounds like the progression that you've made has kind of been slowly taking steps to both obviously improve the financial returns of each place that you were, but by doing so in a way what was making things more efficient and sustainable. Did this start on the equation side of things for you, or was there some kind of feeling that you had before that this was something that you wanted to work towards, and was there any kind of like realization there?
Yeah, I think probably both of those things, I would say. I mean, I can certainly remember working for the oil company at one point and being in this big meeting and having a gentleman I respected greatly at the front of the meeting explaining what we were going to do in this next project, and part of the next activity was to do something called blowing off the gas cap of this oil field. I won't go into the deal of blowing off gas cap. Basically, it just means letting the gas go up in the air. And I sort of asked him, that kind of dawned on me there. I sort of asked him at that meeting. I said, like, is that like the most efficient thing we can do? And in my head, efficient really was meaning both things. It was meaning that can't be very good for the environment. But I also said, like, that's a valuable resource for us also. So I can see there's like a financial equation in here as well as like an environmental equation. And these two things were really coming together for me. That was a really defining moment, I think, for me early in my career, when I sort of realized that I could make an argument here that wasn't just an argument about this sounds like a bad thing, we shouldn't do it, because I knew that argument wasn't going to go anywhere. But I could make an argument to him that actually there's a financial benefit that we could see here too, and we could see both of these things happen. And I think, yeah, from that point on, I think throughout my career, I was always looking for these opportunities. And I think that is honestly a place where there are a lot of opportunities. Do
you have kind of a perspective on this new kind of idea of stranded assets?
I guess my perspective is probably why I'm here at Calvert Foundation, I think whether those businesses divest of their stranded assets or not, I don't think is so relevant. I know that it could have some impact on the share prices of those companies, and that in turn could cause those companies and their executives to perhaps do some things different to try and get themselves back in favor. I think that's possible. But largely, those businesses don't thrive because of the investments that have already been made in them. Those investments were made long ago. They've already done what they've done, and they're in business now. And it'll affect the share price, but that's more or less not such a big deal. But I think it's more what you do with the money that you have, and that's where we come back to impact investing. To the extent that people divest of their potential stranded assets, the issue is more what do they do with the money once they've divested. And if they just put it back into other corporations or other investments, which kind of seems like where they're headed, more like a negative screening type investment, I'm not sure that that's really going to move any needles on anything. I think people are perhaps overplaying that this is going to have some major effect on the coal industry or something. I'm not sure the coal industry is going to be that bothered who divests of their shares. But the interesting thing will be is if we can find a way for those businesses, once they divest, refunnel that money into something that's proactively impactful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a very important point, which is that a problem can't be solved simply by extracting yourself from it. You know,
right.
Because the reality is we need petroleum products for things other than fuel and energy. Mm-hmm. And we would need to put in a very concerted effort into changing the infrastructure so that we can keep up with the capacity. What are some strategies or ideas that the Calvert Foundation has went with or would believe in for future projects?
We're definitely very interested in any kind of renewable energy work. So there was a client of mine in Scotland who was a whiskey maker who had fields and fields of barley and grains and all sorts of things they need to make whiskey. And they would bring these into the factory. And then there's only a certain amount of that that's used, and the rest is waste product. And they would have these huge amounts of waste product, and they would pay companies to truck these away to landfills and wherever, and away it would go, and it would degrade over time and cause more environmental damage when it degraded over time. And we went and talked to them and said, well, you know, you can take that waste product, we can finance for you a biodigester, and you can put that waste product that you have, you've got it, it costs you nothing, it can become the fuel for this digester, and that digester could produce enough energy to run your entire factory, so you could, in effect, use the waste you have, which costs nothing, and cut your energy bill to zero or near zero. That's the kind of example, real-life example of this sort of thing working together, finance and the environment working together. And those kinds of projects are now more readily popping up in the United States in particular, and we're looking at getting behind as many of those as we can too.
The Canadian economy, essentially since inception, has been one of selling minerals and resources that have been extracted from the earth. What are some of the benefits involved with being able to be a country with so much resources to utilize, but what is the responsibility that also kind of comes along with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of benefits, it's not exactly black and white, but it's pretty clear that over the history of our world, the countries that exist today as the most prosperous, profitable countries, largely ones that either had natural resources or had access to natural resources. Canada, having had an unbelievable abundance of natural resources over time, has really helped it become a G8 country, a country that can pretty much take the lead in just about anything it wants. When I was at the World Bank, Canada was regularly one of the countries, I was very proud of that, regularly one of the countries that was trying to take the lead on initiatives and work with me and my team in innovative finance to kind of help drive things forward. And that only comes because we're a country that had wealth. If we didn't have wealth, we wouldn't be able to take those positions as well. And clearly, as you said, a lot of responsibility in having those resources. I think that we don't recognize so well how dependent the rest of the world is on the resources that we have in Canada. If we can be more responsible with them, it can be not just to our benefit, but it can be to everyone's benefit as well. We underestimate the future standing and position and benefit that will generate for the country. I think all countries underestimate that at the moment. At the moment, those are called positive externalities, but I think that the future, those won't be positive externalities, that those will be the things that continue to push those countries to the top of the ladder of countries that then are influencing the world. It'll be because Brazil protects its rainforest and provides oxygen for the planet, because Canada finds a way to provide energy that is in keeping with the health of the planet. You know, it won't be about the money, which is kind of why we are where we are now, the wealth. It won't be because of that. It'll be because of the benefit we're providing to others.
What would happen to Canada if the world decided that they don't want to continue to buy petroleum products? What would happen if Canada continues to put most of its eggs in that basket rather than diversifying its economic portfolio?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a lot of optimism and faith in Canada that we would react positively to the change. You know, I was always very proud being Canadian of all the amazing companies that have come out of Canada. And then I was always very sad that most of them just got bought by American companies and sort of fell by the wayside. But it said to me that now there is this great entrepreneurial spirit that exists in Canada to create these businesses in the first place. It'll be a big deal when those flows of funds and those businesses start to dry up. And it would be good if in Canada we started preparing ahead of time for that, because I think we definitely have what it takes to become the second generation of businesses in Canada.
When, let's say, you take away the legitimate claim that First Nations have to the rights of the land, if you put that aside for a second, a lot of the other processes that are happening are completely legal, and policies have been changed to allow for these processes to happen. So what's the role of the people, the democracy, but by extension the representatives in government to make sure that if an industry is going to exist, that it follows a certain kind of environmental responsibility?
I'm with you. I think the biggest issue that they have is a time frame issue. Not to harp too much on politicians, but I think generally that's an issue that politicians have, is they see themselves in like 4-year increments. And what you really need to get exactly what you're saying is Canada is not about 4 years. Canada is about all of history and all of the future that it's going to have. And what you really want are people to come into government that say, look, elect me for this role, and my mandate will be that I'm not going to think about the next 4 years. I'm going to take a long-term view of what's happening in our country, and I'm going to put in place policies that make Canada better for the long term. Like, if you honestly had somebody who did that, I think you would definitely have seen something different done in the oil sands. And that comes from my experience having worked for a company that was part of that.
For yourself, what do you think Canadians at large could learn from the American spirit? You know, I mean, it's something that I think a lot of us feel kind of exists, this kind of American can-do attitude. But for you, how have you kind of felt this in your own life?
Definitely in America, I think there's kind of attitude or undercurrent that says you're responsible for your lot in this country. And that has pros and cons. If you can take that spirit that exists here and that undercurrent and make it work for you, you will be able to fly here. And if you can't, and this is the part that probably the world doesn't see as much, is that there is a lot of poverty in America. And I think in Canada we benefit greatly from the fact that we have a much healthier, better safety net. In America you don't have that as much. There isn't quite this safety net that exists here. And I think that definitely plays into this spirit of wanting to try and do things and create things, because if you can do it, there's no better place to be. But if you can't do it, I think those people don't get highlighted enough in America, that there is a lot of people who it didn't work for, or it's not working for.
When I look at American history, I see, a real rich kind of history of, fighting for civil rights and people kind of saying, enough is enough, and kind of coming with demands and kind of a certain kind of entitlement to the freedom that was promised to them. And I just feel like that's something that we're just maybe starting to see in Canada. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the next big movement, the income inequality divide, this 99.1% thing is really, I think, going to be the next civil rights movement. I don't know how it'll play out exactly, but I think there's just a lot of people that think the wealth of the country has been siphoned into a very small group of people, and when people think about, but that was the history of our country, why is it sitting in the hands of a few people? I think you could see that same sort of thing in Canada. Canada's a great country with an amazing history, and it has great safety nets, which is a big difference in this. But still, I think there is still an income inequality divide. And why do people at the bottom have to sort of live with what the tar sands look like today and what happened to the environment up there, so that that can benefit people at the top? That sort of equation is going to be the next bubble. I don't know when it'll come, but at some point we've already seen start of it, and I think that'll be a big movement.
Well, we can't thank you enough for the time that you've spent. It's been really enriching, and it's great to kind of get that Canadian-American in perspective, because we're all kind of trying to figure that out in Canada, where we stand, and, the United States is the most powerful country on the earth, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from the mistakes and from the successes. So thank you for helping bridge that gap.
You're welcome, Ray. No, I appreciate the time. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.